I'm not odious.
Okay, we're back with Julian Raven, author of Odious and
Cerberus, an American
Cerberus.
immigrant's odyssey and his free speech legal war against Smithsonian corruption.
It's a fantastic book. I have to confess, I blurbed it myself. A funny, revealing, and entertaining story of one man's struggle against overwhelming odds. I see some other people who I've interviewed, by the way. Brilliant Bill Donahue, the Catholic League. And anyone who enjoys David versus Goliath story should read Julian Raven's Odious and Cerberus. Cerberus. Scott Douglas Gerber, professor of law at Ohio Northern University. Both of whom have appeared on my interviews, so that's very good. Of course, the big blurb is from Craig Shirley, Reagan aide, acclaimed biographer, and I guess he was helping you with this. We were just as where you said you were in the Washington Times front page story. Only one person contacted you, and that was me.
Larry Jarvik.
That's unbelievable to me. You know, I thought for sure you'd have a lot of response, but this just goes to show you what everyone's up against here in the so-called cultural realm. I mean, it's unbelievable because there's literally the left controls everything because there is no opposition de facto. Nobody does a thing. And you have your taste of the Smithsonian. Why was this Obama appointee still in charge of the Smithsonian after the election? Why are all the people the same people? Why does Justice Roberts not touch it and not do anything? Why is it a bastion of one viewpoint, one political viewpoint, when, you know, say what you like. I'm not saying take out all the extra pictures of Obama, even though the director of the Smithsonian, the only publication I could find in the Wikipedia article was about the Obama portraits as shrine and pilgrimage. Well, that's very nice if you believe in the cult of Obama, but first of all, there's a separation of church and state. Secondly, if you've got a shrine to Obama in there, you have to have a shrine to Trump. You can't have just one shrine in the Smithsonian. You know, it can be like a Catholic cathedral with lots of different saints. But one of those presidents is Donald Trump. Love him, hate him, whatever. I mean, there's more on Nixon in there than there is on Trump. And they hate Nixon. So anyway,
well, there was that funny story with the Washingtonian journalist who, you know, he sort of was trying to, you know, I go into detail of it obviously in the book, but when we walked around the National Portrait Gallery together, he was trying to find some mention of Trump in the museum, and at one point he's actually fumbling through the paper on the floor. There was this printer. It was like an art installation of a bit old-fashioned printer. You know, they used to print out the paper with the dots on the side. It was printing out massive pile, probably a 20 or 30 foot pile of paper, and it was all the news that was being printed on a 24/7 basis. Well, he's thumbing through this paper. It's an art show. It's an exhibit, and he's thumbing through it. And after about half an hour, he's like, "Aha! I found it." He found the name of Trump mentioned on this paper. He said it was the only place he could find a mention of it in the museum. I thought that was quite fun. It's in the book. It's a very, very funny part of the story.
But they did have one photograph of Trump in there, didn't they?
They had in their archives. They have it. They had them in the archives, but nothing was on display. That was the point at the time. They had four old. One of them is a cartoon sketch of Trump as like Icarus, you know, with dollar bills, you know, burning up at the sun. Then two other sort of dot matrix printouts of Trump from like the 80s. And then this other photograph of Trump tossing the apple in the air, which they used as the replacement for my portrait. And my portrait, I was not applying for it to be part of the presidential collection. I was merely applying to loan it to the National Portrait Gallery only for the inauguration, because that's what the Obama portrait was originally given for. And I said, in the event that after the inauguration, they would like to keep it or keep it on show, I said we could negotiate or work something out. But it was submitted just to show for the inauguration as a tribute. That was all.
Well, let me ask you another question. Why do you think it is that Republicans won't support someone like you? Why won't they take on this issue, which seemed to me like a no-brainer, because it's a litmus test that tells you something's rotten at the Smithsonian, and yet nobody wanted to deal with it.
You know what I've concluded, Larry, and I may be wrong, obviously, but as a foreigner, The Smithsonian to me is just a name. It doesn't, now it's obviously a lot more because I've spent so many years researching it, but I have found that there is a mystique, there is a spiritual reverence that people have, you know, from the other, even on the David Webb show, I think it was, when he says, you know, I remember the Smithsonian, we went there as a child, and, you know, everybody like makes a pilgrimage to Washington, D.C., and they go to the Smithsonian Institution. It holds such a revered place in the heart of American people that people don't dare speak against it. People don't dare. It's like I had people say to me, how dare you sue the Smithsonian? That they were indignant that it's like a sacred cow. It's like an idol, Larry. And I think that is a controlling factor in people's hearts, that they are unwilling to touch this sacred Smithsonian because of the prestige and this mystique that surrounds it. They would rather just say there's no way. In other words, it's like the Catholic Church being infallible before the Reformation, and that whole transformation that took place in that institution. People dare not question the authority of the church. People dare not question the Smithsonian Institution. There's no way on earth that Julian Raven could be right. There's no way that I could in any way I have to be wrong, and the status quo has to be right. That is what I am coming up against, and I believe that is the principal factor that people, whether you're conservative or Republican, they do not want to touch the Smithsonian. They have such a awe and reverence for it since childhood. I think that explains it.
Yet the left has no problem, when they opened the African American History Museum, the head of which is now head of the Smithsonian, the head of it at that time, they excluded Clarence Thomas, which was a snub. That was a viewpoint discrimination. There had to be a big fuss just to get him back in. They have a giant room for Emmett Till, but it's clearly viewpoint discrimination in every museum they have. Let me ask you another question. They have something at the Smithsonian called the Archives of American Art. Are you familiar with that?
Not particularly. No, I
mean, well, that is the national repository of collection of all of the archives of all the American artists. So you go there. My wife was an art historian, and she did some research there. So if you're researching an American artist, they will have their papers there, reviews. Sometimes they'll have actual artworks and so forth. Did anyone ever come up to you after this fight, say, gee, now you've sued the Smithsonian, you're a historic, saying with Trump, you're a significant American artist, you should be in the Archives of American Art?
No, I am anathema to those people.
But do you know that's viewpoint discrimination? You can sue them again. I'm serious.
Well, that gets to.
I'd like to give my papers to the Archives of American Art.
Well, that gets to this new stage, though, this new initiative that I have, which is part of that press release that I sent you, and which is now, you see, after this cockamamie ruling by Judge McFadden, what he said in there, nationalizing this once private trust, you see, that's the whole issue of FOIA and of Grassley failing because the Smithsonian is a private trust. Private trusts are not legally bound by government rules concerning FOIA, so they don't have to show their paperwork like government agencies do. But his ruling made the Smithsonian a government agency, an institution that is, he said, through and through a government institution. And so now, because of his ruling, I'm going to press, and I've sent out letters to all the board members of the Smithsonian Board of Regents, once again to John Roberts. Kim said, I sent them all a copy of the book, and I sent them this letter, and part of the letter is a request to be at the next Board of Regents meeting, because the Public Meetings Act causes and compels all government institutions to have public meetings when they have a quorum and when they are making decisions in a setting with public funds. So because all this is taking place, even though, in my opinion, it's illegitimate, the fact that this judge has made this ruling is giving me grounds now to push them to open their meetings to the public. And if they refuse to do that, if they ignore me, or if they write and say, no, go away, Mr. Raven, you're never coming into the Smithsonian once again, I then can file a complaint with the federal court for basically a declaratory and injunctive relief, a proclamation from the court actually defining the role of the Smithsonian, whether or not it has to comport with the Open Meetings Act. And that now, because of what Judge McFadden has said, it's like, well, here you made the Smithsonian a government institution in black and white. Senator Chuck Grassley didn't even have that when he tried to get them to comport with FOIA. I've got it now. That's my next approach to give me grounds to take them to court.
I don't want you to
again.
give away your strategy. It might work. It might work. I hope, the Federalist Society just got $1.6 billion from an old Jewish businessman in Chicago, and Barry Side, who made trip switches. And I'm hoping they will take 10% of that, or $160 million, and devote it to legal work on behalf of cultural and artistic issues, because they've totally neglected. I did the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I almost worked on the Smithsonian issue years ago, and I actually wrote some articles about the atom bomb exhibit they did at the Smithsonian. And there simply is nobody, like you said with your article, there's nobody out there. You need a lawyer, especially a big name lawyer, a Craig Shirley level lawyer, who can help you, because in Washington, it's not just what you know, it's who you know.
Right.
And the disadvantage, it's all very nice. Hollywood movies, Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I believed it too. I went to Washington, but it turns out that was a movie. Yeah. And when it actually happens, those senators who were the villains of the movie in the real world, they let Jimmy Stewart collapse and die. And that's it. In other words, there is no happy ending. So
a positive from my press release that I put out 2 weeks ago is that FOIA Advisors is I don't know, how influential it is, but it's a law firm or legal website with lawyers attached to it who are experts in this Freedom of Information Act law that's called FOIAadvisors.com. They copied and posted my press release. So that was a huge kibosh in for me to say, hey, this is a point here this guy's making. I said that the fact that they posted on their site, I was amazed. I sent him a copy of the book. I sent him a copy of this new initiative, because I'm like saying, if you can get these guys to step up and say, well, we want to push this question now that I'm asking based upon the ruling. See, for the year and a half or 2 years since that ruling, or longer, sorry, 3 years, 4 years now, my goodness, time passes, of McFadden, I have asked constantly in my mind, it's like asking God, saying, how do I now relitigate this issue based upon this cockamamie ruling, to expose, basically to call their bluff and to say, look at the stupid ruling that this judge made, and look how it doesn't make any sense and it has no legal basis at all. And some issue has to come up to give me grounds to make that case. And I believe
I would really say you should do the Archives of American Art. I will send you the link, and I'll put a link in. But they have a legal obligation to preserve the history of American art and American artists. So I mean,
I'm anathema to those folks. They are like, oh no, it's him. I was down at the Smithsonian. I was there 3 weeks ago at the steps of the Smithsonian, and I have a whole video I'm going to be putting in. We were interviewing people, asking them about what they thought the Smithsonian Institution was, just to see how people they absolutely have no clue. Asking them, do you know who the Chancellor of the Smithsonian is? And they're like, no. Would you believe it? It's Justice John Roberts. And they're like, no way. So it's just, there's a hidden secretness to the Smithsonian that is, it's no longer going to be. We're going to expose it enough that people start asking the right questions.
It's not that easy, believe me. But
that's
Senator
the God,
Ted Stevens,
Larry. That's the God
with.
question. That's you see, if God is with me, if He is, then all I have to do is keep showing up. I'm just nobody. I'm just like a little guy with no power. But if the very purpose of God and destiny is behind me, there's nothing that will stop that. Absolutely nothing. Whether they kill you, whether they do it, God's purpose and plan will keep going, because all he looks for in human vessels is not my ability, is not my wealth or fame or nothing like that counts. All he wants is obedience. All he wants is, will you go and stand? And it's like David going up against Goliath. He's just a little kid, a shepherd boy with a sling. He's got no, like, you can't do this. But all he had to do was go and take what he had and put it into play. And my goodness, he kills Goliath. And he slayed what nobody could believe that could happen. So I shared this with you, I think the first time we met, and I said, that's where my faith comes in, because I asked my wife every day, I said, why am I even doing this? I mean, what I'm not doing this because I have some thing I have to do. I said, no, it just doesn't leave. It's in my mind all the time. I wake up and I'm like, oh my goodness, look at, it's like it's constantly living with me and pushing me forward constantly to do this. So I believe that it is my destiny. And because of that, and because of my faith and where my faith is, I just have to keep turning up. And eventually God's going to do something, and it'll be like, well, you see, there, it's not me. It's just God is particularly interested in the Smithsonian. And you know why that is? John Quincy Adams, when he argued in favor of accepting the Smithsonian bequest, his money in 1836, John Quincy Adams, in his eloquence in the book, his eloquent speech that he gave, he argues that knowledge is from the Creator, that knowledge is from God, and that the increase and diffusion of knowledge is this noble quest that only human beings made in the image and likeness of God. So here he does this great argument in favor of knowledge being the attribute that God has given to man and not to the animals. And so God was invoked and woven into the very fabric of, I believe, the Smithsonian Act. And so he's personally and particularly interested in it, especially when they betray their fiduciary duties.
Well,
so
you can go farther than that, because he's actually entombed. His ashes are in the Smithsonian, and you could argue that he was an Englishman who gave a gift to the Smithsonian, even though he never saw it, and you're an Englishman who is coming to try and make sure the institution lives up to the terms of that gift, and that the ghost of Smithson is haunting them, and you are the instrument to get them to act. So I mean, we don't know, but it could be true.
But Larry, I mean, the spiritual component, we're blind to most of the time. We don't know. We don't see what's going on behind the scenes. But when I look, and I try to do this with my life, and I'm very introspective. I look at my life, my experience, and I look back all the time, and I look at all the steps, and I'm like, there's no way. It's like, how did I end up doing this? It's like, there's just no way this is an accident. When you look back, it's just no way. It's just destiny unfolding. And so all I have to keep doing is just moving forward, being faithful, doing the right thing, being above board, being above reproach, bringing the right questions, doing it in a respectful manner, doing it as a Christian, as a testimony to my faith, and then believing that God is going to do something. And all I can say is I don't know the end result, but I know that there's enough that has gone on right now that encourages me to keep going, because even though I don't know my tomorrows, I have no clue. I'm going to do this because I believe I'm going to prevail. I believe that the right will eventually come out and people will say, yeah, you know what? He was absolutely right. And I look forward to that day. That day of vindication will be sweet. It might be another 5 years.
You could say your videos you make on the steps of the Smithsonian are works of performance art, and that they'll have to include them in the retrospective. That they devote to you to make up for all the tourists that they've given you over the years. So
yeah, whether they compensate or not, I don't know. I'm more interested, to be honest. Like Richard von Sternberg, what they did to him was so terrible. I thought you get indignation when people wrong you, and I'm like, yeah, of course I'm indignant. But what they did to him, I'm like, it's so easy to see when injustice like that happens to someone else. You're like, I'm going to bang that drum because it's just so terrible. And again, that's the God component. See, when they barred Richard von Sternberg, it was because he dared to publish in the Proceedings magazine, the prestigious scientific magazines, this article by Dr. Stephen Meyer, which was basically going through all the questions about evolution, but then coming to the conclusion that, you know what, intelligent design really really does answer these questions in a more reasonable, logical, or scientific manner. And so even the
That could
mere
be.
fact that he presented the intelligent design question caused him to lose his job and his reputation. They destroyed the man because he dared to do that. That's enough to engage God to say, okay, I'm going to come down there and I'm going to sort this place out.
Well, not only that, Charles Darwin originally came up with his evolutionary model as a religious explanation. You know, I mean, in other words, he was a religious Unitarian. So the suppression of religion in American elite institutions is also, you know, they're going against God. It's not just against us.
There's absolutely no doubt. And the thing with Sternberg is that his was viewpoint discrimination. Once again, his case was argued in Congress. He had all these, and it's all quoted in the book. It's all, you wouldn't believe what was done to him and what they, you know, Senator at the time, Rick Santorum. You had a congressman involved in it. They were like, this is unbelievable. His viewpoint as a scientist, his viewpoint, which is part of the academic freedom that science should encourage and foster, his viewpoint is being destroyed because it doesn't match the pro-Darwinian point of view. Well, where's the freedom of inquiry? Where's the freedom of thought? Where's the curiosity? Where's the freedom to be, you know, to search for answers and to have different ideas? That's just unbelievable to me, especially because of the divine component. And so I'm like, you know, God is a God of vengeance. He is. There's no doubt about it. And he's jealous for his own reputation in that sense. And there's a point where things will happen where if it's the time of visitation, Larry, if it is God's time for the Smithsonian Institution, that may be a domino that affects the institutions across this country because of the scale and prestige that it has. If it is that time, it's going to happen. And it's not because of me. It's just because of its time. It's not. I'm a pawn on a chessboard. That's all.
Well, let's go on about that. This book is a fact now, and anyone can read it. Can you tell me a little bit? How has the reception been? Have you been getting reviews, and where being discussed? For instance, I heard you on the David Webb show. He's a big name, and even said he wants to buy some of your art, which was nice. Is there any other public response? You said you sent copies to the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian. You sent a copy, I think, to the director of the Smithsonian. Who have you sent copies to, and what responses have you gotten?
The media articles and interviews, I had quite a few of them, and they can be found at ODIOUSCERBERUS.com, the website, on the media page. The responses that I get, I had this great thing the other day. Someone banged on my door right here at my warehouse where my art studio is, and he's a local businessman, and he'd been reading it for like 6 weeks. Excuse me. And he just, he couldn't get in touch with me, but he sent me a text after. He said, I just wanted to tell you, I finished reading your book and I want to talk about it with you. And it was very complimentary. I had a wonderful review written by a journalist who's, I don't know if she's active right now, but she wrote a story in the Washington Post about my journey a few years ago. She read the book, and she's a leftist. She's on the other side. And she's like, you got to read this book. She was a very, very good article and a review from somebody who is on the other side of the fence.
Okay, where was that review published, and what's the name of the author?
It's her name is Audrey Hoffer. It's on Odious and Cerberus. It's on the blog page.
Oh, so she didn't publish it in the Washington Post.
No, she was writing the review. I told her to put it in there, and whether she is or not, I'm not sure. She was writing it originally to post on the purchase on Amazon as a 5-star review. She wanted to put it up there.
So you have one review from a Washington Post. This is very important. Audrey Hoffer is her name?
Her name, yep.
And that is on your website?
She's a freelance journalist that wrote for the Washington Post magazine. There's a good article about the struggle of conservatives in the arts that she wrote. It was a very good article. There's no bias in there. She just wrote it as it was. She was very straight, very honest.
Do you have a link? You have a link to that?
I do. Yeah, there is on the website, and also you can just Google the Washington Post and Julian Raven, and you'll see that article come up. That was very.
In other words, did she review her review? is
Is
her
on the
review of your book?
on the blog page of the website
Okay.
ODIOUSCERBERUS.com. You can read the review, and
So
that's
what?
very encouraging from a liberal. And she says it in there. She says, I don't find any of this appealing. She were the parts that offended her, but she says overall it was a 5-star review. You need to read this book. It's a very good honest review. And I was like, wow, that really is meaningful to me.
Okay, that's one. What other reviews have you gotten?
Other than that, the people that I know that have read it, that have commented, individuals, but the book is, this is that whole learning phase of writing a book. I've never been through this. It's going to take time just my wife trying to call me. It's going to take time for it to gain its place and its place in the American conversation. I'm going on a national book tour, Larry, by the grace of God, with my motorhome. By the winter time, I'm out of here. I'm taking this on the road. I'm going to go city to city, state to state, and have book signings and book.
What about art magazines? Have you sent copies to Art in America or Art Forum?
Yep, I have not sent copies of the book. I've been busy with publicizing. And it's a journey of continually bringing. I just wrote to Politics and Prose, which is that bookstore in Washington D.C., and that wanting to see it in 6 months if I can have a book signing down there. Now that Barnes and Noble is carrying my book, I can do a book signing at Barnes and Noble in Washington D.C.
That'd be good.
And so all of this.
What about the Smithsonian? Have you sent it to the Smithsonian magazine?
Not to the magazine. No, I've sent it to.
Because they review books.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that.
Let's see what they do.
Yep.
And then what about the Wall Street Journal?
The Wall Street, yeah. I've not sent it yet to places for review, but that's new to me to do that. But I'm looking all the time. I'm very busy.
Do you have a publicist?
Yeah, I did. Yep. And they've helped with those interviews, and But the thing with the Smithsonian, this is what I've.
Because the key thing I find is reviews. Interviews, they come and go,
right.
But the reviews somehow for booksellers and libraries.
It just last week, my book came online on Barnes and Noble, and that gives it a good standing. Once I have a few book signings at Barnes and Noble, and you can start getting into, because people, they look at the book and obviously it's intimidating. It's not an easy read for most people.
It's a scary cover, I have to say.
It is. And so people
it doesn't look like the nice friendly pictures behind you.
Well, it's different. It's like when you're considering God, you have to consider the terror of God and the kindness and the grace and love of God. You got to have both. You can't have just one side. You got to have a balance. You have to have the terrors of the Lord and the kindness and the mercy and grace and forgiveness. So those, we have to deal with it. And when you're dealing with a very ugly situation, you mentioned at the end of the first segment we did, odious and Cerberus. Who is odious and who is Cerberus? That comes from the ruling of a federal judge. I'm not going to say who he called odious, but he ruled that somebody was odious. And then he was the one that gave me the name Cerberus. It's in the ruling. He called the Smithsonian Institution Cerberus. And so like this 3-headed mythical beast from the guardian of the gates of hell. And that's from the words in the mouth of a federal judge. So I was given the title by the federal judge. And so that whole that imagery I thought was perfect to create this sort of, mystical type of journey that I'm on, that as an analogy that sort of runs parallel, as you read in the book, with my story.
How about the legal press, American Law Journal, National Law Journal,
Yep.
American Lawyer, various legal, I would think there'd be some lawyers, First Amendment lawyers, lawyers for the arts. I mean, they must have some interest in this.
They will, and the more that I get the interviews and the conversation around it, it's a process that I'm obviously learning how to do, and it's long term. This maybe take 4 or 5 years to get to where.
I don't know. I mean, you could do one mass mailing. How about the public administration sector? The journals of public administration and all the sort of public administrators' newsletters, because there's actually a case here. This is a public administration issue as well.
They're very good.
What do you do?
Well, that's all very good. Those ideas are very good. And then
finally we come to the big enchilada. What about people like Tucker Carlson?
Again, it's got to get there
or
in
Dennis
front of these
Prager,
folks. And
or Ben Shapiro, or
yep.
those people, Barry Weiss.
I think that the journey is just one step at a time. Where I put it out, I send emails out. You can only do so much, and then you can't make them take the story. But with this next stage with this initiative, which I think is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, because over the next 2 months, if I don't get a response from the Smithsonian about the request to be at the board meeting, because now it needs to comply with the Open Meetings Act, that's going to give me grounds to file. And once I file again, that's going to help me, to promote the story and say, this is an ongoing story. It's not going away. We're going to push again in another side. So,
I used to spend time, I worked for David Horowitz and at the Heritage Foundation too, and I went to these board meetings of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, National Endowment for the Arts, and National Endowment for the Humanities.
They have to have them, right? They have to have.
Yeah,
you went to the.
But after a while, it was really kind of dispiriting, I have to say.
But Larry, think about it. The Smithsonian doesn't open their board meetings to the public.
Ever.
Never.
And then, is there a record? Is there minutes?
They put out their minutes whenever they want. Like once a year, they put out their minutes. But there's no comment. They're making decisions with $700 million of taxpayer monies that they appropriate each year behind closed door. It's totally secret.
There's no public comment.
Nothing.
Provision.
Nothing. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, the reason why is because they were a private trust and they could get away with it because private trusts are not obligated under the law. But now that McFadden said, oh, it's no longer a private trust, it's now a government through and through, he's given me the legal grounds to say, well, even though I think it's wrong, we're just going to play this game and say, well, you've said it's the government. Now they have to open the meetings to the public and I need to comment. So
what you're saying is, in fact, although you didn't intend it this way, you did succeed. Your lawsuit succeeded because you got a ruling from a federal judge, which is now the law until it's overturned by the Supreme Court.
Right.
But until then, the law is it's now a public entity, no longer a private entity. So as a result of your case, the Smithsonian Museum actually had its charter changed due to one man, Julian Raven. He made a difference. And thanks to him, it's a federal agency just like any other now, and subject to all the restrictions and obligations of any taxpayer-funded entity. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly.
So in fact, isn't it going to be
a
success?
Yeah.
It's not the story of a frustrating failure with the dogs of hell biting you. You need another illustration on the Supreme Court where he handed you the keys to the kingdom.
Well, that's what we have to say. Larry, just but think about it. There's a judge is going to be confronted with Trevor McFadden's ruling, and it says in 3 or 4 places clearly how he's basically converted or nationalized this institution.
I think we've now learned it's called black letter law. I think.
Well, I didn't get that. Sorry.
I think it's called black letter law. I think we've gotten this from the abortion case. It's the law now.
It's the law. Okay, so because of that, the judge is going to have to respond and then give an order as a response. That's going to be amazing because it's like, this is the reason that I was looking for, to say, now I have to compel the courts to say something about this ruling. They refused, the Supreme Court refused to do it. Now this court's going to be compelled to do it because it's called a complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief. And it makes the court say what the law is regarding the obligations of a government institution. They can't get away with it. And he's either going to say, well, it's not what it says, or I'm like, what in the world are they going to say? I think it's very exciting.
A top-level constitutional lawyer working with you, like an Alan Dershowitz.
Well,
or somebody
I asked the FOIA advisors who posted the press release, I sent them a book and I wrote them and I said, this is what I'm doing. This is my initiative. If you want to join me because of your interest in FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act and the Public Meetings Act, they're all basically the same thing. They're all about transparency, government transparency, and all of the laws that compel government to act in the public eye. That to me now is a very interesting angle that I was looking for years. And then we're going to see what happens. So,
yeah, although I did warn you earlier, FOIA can be very frustrating. I know we have to wrap it up because I sued the CIA under FOIA and got nothing twice except lawyers' bills. So I mean,
whether I get anything or not, it's going to be up to what the question is whether or not they have to abide by it now. Grassley failed for years to force them to abide by FOIA because the Smithsonian entity was a private trust. They could get it. They could keep slipping out of his hand.
Oh, I see. So you flipped it.
Now that's right. Now with this ruling, it changes the whole thing. So I can go and say, well, hey, all right, well,
do you
here
have
it is.
a Grassley staffer working with you?
I don't know. They're aware of my book. I was in touch with the assistant press.
Did you send them a copy of your book?
Yep, it's in the mail. And so they're going to know all about this once again. And we're going to see what they say. And even Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, the DC Congresswoman, she's been trying to compel compliance and reform at the Smithsonian. She's getting a book as well.
Really?
Those allies could be
She would
very,
actually have more clout, I would think. I mean, if you could get bipartisan support.
Right, and she's a Democrat, and so with her and Grassley and this, I said, this might just be the recipe.
Did you send Eleanor Holmes Norton a copy of the book?
I did.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Any Democratic support you can get raises your chance of getting anything done.
She tried. It's in the book, Larry. She tried for years to compel. After the 2007 scandals of Secretary Smalls at the Smithsonian, she tried for years and didn't get anywhere. And it's all about the entity status. Now there's a change in this because of this ruling. Everything can change. Well, if you get her on your side, I think you'll get some press coverage, and you may even get into the Smithsonian. It would be great to go. You have to come up. You have to fly out for that, Larry. With her and video. Yeah. I don't know if I'm going back to Washington for a long time. But anyway, well, God bless you. Thank you for doing this book. I'll hold it up again. Odious and Cerberus by Julian Raven. And I highly recommend it. I blurbed it. I would review it myself. It might be a little wrong for me to try and write a review, but I may review it for Amazon. I think it's fantastic. And the story is, I lived a variation of it in another life. And so it's interesting to see somebody going through similar things in a different context. And I think you've gotten actually a better result than me, because you did get a ruling from a judge, which moves you one step forward. And if you can get Eleanor Holmes Norton and have a bipartisan thing that takes apart. And the truth is, at one point you were very pro-Trump, then you were critical of Trump. So you're not a brainwashed MAGA person. You're an independent by definition. And I think that gives you some extra credibility there too. So you're not working for Donald Trump on this one. Nope. You're working, I think you're working for God, I think is what you got it. Amen. All right. Well, thank you. We'll stay tuned. And we look forward to seeing how this progresses. And we can come back if there's more news. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Larry. Take care. Bless you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.